Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out ProRevenge. Story 1. IT ProRevenge on cheating wife. TLDR below. Someone posted a story earlier that was a bit too close to a true story that I was involved in. I previously shared it as a comment in another sub and thought I'd share the real story. This takes place before smartphones were omnipresent. I had a friend, we'll call him Bob, that was suspicious of his wife's social circle. One of her closest friends had been caught cheating and tried to throw her under the bus as well. Bob had no proof and things settled down for a while. Bob was an IT professional and very good with PCs and networks. Nearly a year later, Bob's wife is acting shady again after her high school reunion. He confides in me and we talked through some scenarios. He jokingly mentioned a keylogger. He finally asked me to just drop it and most of all don't tell anyone, not even your wife. A couple months pass and I'm up early, 5:36, getting ready for work. I get a Facebook Messenger notification and see that I've been sent a link from Bob, but it's a group chat. It's literally everyone we know, her family, his family, our friends, strangers, everyone. I didn't open it. It looked like a phishing link even though it came from him who's extremely cautious. A short while later I get an email from Bob with some ominous/unsavory. Story 2. I left behind a dead man's switch in the company workflow when I sensed I was about to be bullied into quitting. First of all, the story is a bit older, but I will keep stuff rather ambiguous at times just for my own safety. I don't know how much my company can find out. I hope I can put it into words so everyone understands, especially as English is not my first language. Also there will be a TLDR at the bottom. Also, there are some Google translations in this, so please be merciful. So, let's get started. I started working in logistics at a company that builds things. That was just as COVID was starting actually. When I started, we were 5 people in the team, but one of the guys quit soon after. This is important because it was a very good insight into how my department operates when they don't need or want a certain someone around. They will not outright fire you, since then they have to pay you a severance. But instead, they will bully you into quitting. I saw pretty much the whole package. Excluding them from meetings and important events. Putting them down in public, lecturing them, never noticing good work done, but always making sure everyone knows about work that is poorly done. Drowning someone in work and then berating them when they inevitably can't keep up. It was outright childish at times. I didn't register it at the time, but it was a really valuable lesson for later. I was put in charge of managing our overseas suppliers, among other things. About half of our material came from overseas, most of that from China. While it seems like a big task for someone new, it wasn't done out of malice. Genuinely everyone believed we were going to get a guy in China for the Chinese supplies, then I'd be left for the handful of others. It seemed fair. But we never got that guy for China. And I was left with all overseas suppliers. Another important thing is that just in this project the company had decided to change the workflow for overseas suppliers. This is because due to COVID the price of shipping containers had exploded. To explain it as simply as possible. Previously the suppliers were responsible for filling our containers and bringing them to the harbor, we were responsible for picking them up from the harbor and bringing them to us. However, due to demands and many other things, sometimes we just needed 2 or 3 pallets of parts where a dozen or more could fit inside a container. So, we were shipping a lot of air. The new workflow would have the suppliers bring the parts to an external warehouse, one in the US, one in China, then we would load them into containers to get the containers as full as possible, and then bring them to the harbor and then into our plant. This way we needed to rent far fewer containers. This complicated things because it erased the direct contact from us to the suppliers. And there was no official method how we were going to keep in contact with suppliers, tell them how many parts we need, how to package them, if there were any changes requested, etc. During that time, I was left mostly alone to deal with it, and I set up a system with Excel. It was mostly manual, rather simple, but it worked well. It worked so well that one of the suits even chatted with me about it for a bit since he wanted to make it a standard in future projects. And also, this is very important, I was the only person who actually knew all our overseas suppliers and their contacts. Some of you might be able to tell where this story is going already. So, during that entire time, nobody had actually bothered to ask me to explain to them how my system worked and where I kept track of all the supplier contacts. All of this data was hidden on like slide 800 of some Excel file I had saved in a folder titled Part Pictures, which was otherwise filled with pictures of parts. Now, moving forward, as COVID began dying down, the department for whatever reason decided they don't need me anymore. I have theories but nothing certain, so I will just leave it at that. I pretty much saw precisely the same thing go down as I had seen with that one guy who had left shortly after I started. All the bullying. I thought to myself at first that if I pull through and keep doing a good job, and I believe I did a good job, they would eventually cool down. But they didn't. After 2 months of that I said fuck it, and decided to just sit out and endure until the Christmas bonus we get every year, and then hand in my notice. And also, I just delayed teaching anyone how my system worked until I was gone. And that is pretty much how it happened. Off topic, for my own future employment, I actually lucked out. One of the local suppliers I was managing had a really chill guy as managing director. I gave him a call, explained I was about to be unemployed, asked if they needed staff. He then called me into an interview. We talked about anime for an hour while his HR lady looked confused about what a Attack on Titan was, and he told me I can come in the moment I am done with my, then, current job. Back on topic, a month into working at my new job, I got a call from my old job. The department manager. To his credit, he was always a reasonable guy. He told me in plain words that they have no idea where TF to even start with the Chinese suppliers. He then offered me my old job back with a very respectable pay increase. I explained that I already had a new job. 2 days later I got another call where the same manager offered me many times my monthly salary just to come in for 1 week and instruct my old team in how my process functioned, introduce them to all the contacts, etc. I told him I refused because of the way I had been treated by them when I worked there. He said that he understood and wished me luck at my new job and hung up. The reason I am writing this story now, this week I randomly got in touch with some of the people in the transport department from my old job. They mentioned that in the now 10 months since I left, the logistics department racked up 8-figure losses due to wrong deliveries, over and under deliveries, outdated parts, some suppliers cancelling their contracts and new suppliers needing to be sourced, etc. And all the blame for that fell on my old team. My new job is fine. It's not the best job, but I get to travel a lot and get nice bonuses for it. My boss isn't around much since he married. I do sometimes regret not taking that offer for a week as an instructor. So yeah, hope you all enjoyed the read. TL, Dr. Company put me in charge of managing overseas suppliers, unintentionally making me the only guy who knew the suppliers and knew the system I had created to exchange data with them. When my company started bullying me into quitting, I avoided instructing anyone from my team in how my system worked, leading to them asking me to come back after I quit, and then racking up 8-figure losses after I refused to come back. Story 3. Revenge on a client who tried to throw me under the bus. I was pushing 40, and I'd learned a lot of lessons in more than 10 years of legal practice. But one of the most important lessons I learned was from an older lawyer that I worked for as a summer student, after the 2nd year of law school. A lawyer has 3 duties, he told me, first to himself, second to the court, and last, the client. Always make sure you come first, and the client comes last. The reason? Because clients will fuck you, he said, they'll throw you under the bus without thinking twice. I should have stayed with this lawyer, but being young and an idiot, I had to go work downtown, and I'm still downtown now, but fortunately for me, I remembered this lesson, and it came in handy many years later when a client really did try to throw me under the bus. My client was this mid-sized company that did this and that and owned things here and there, not big enough to be listed, but it did have a pretty sizable real estate portfolio, and one day a building they owned burned to the ground. The company wanted to collect on the insurance, so they told Frank, a veteran salaryman, to deal with it. Frank was close to 60 and thought he knew what he was doing. He didn't need me to help him with the insurance claim, he told me, he had everything under control. Besides, lawyers are expensive. Some guys really get off on not paying legal fees, and Frank was one of those guys who gloated over every penny that he managed not to pay to the lawyers. I dealt with Frank a lot, and he was always nickel and diming me. The insurer is going to fuck you, I told Frank. It was only by luck that I even knew about the fire and the loss because Frank had not asked for my help, he'd just let it slip one day, and since then, I'd kept on top of him, trying to get him to smarten up. I'd had to fight to get him to send me the proof of loss form to make sure he hadn't messed that up. Frank fucked up a lot, and I wondered sometimes how he had a job. But the proof of loss was okay, at least, so that was one less thing to worry about. You don't know that, he said. I could tell he just wanted to get me off the phone. I'm paid to know when insurers are trying to screw my clients, I said, and the insurer is going to screw you. They've been stringing you along for ages with requests and questions and paperwork, but they aren't going to pay you. Not unless you sue them. But Frank said he knew what he was doing, that it was all under control, and besides, he got along with the adjusters so great. The limitation period expires in 2 weeks, I said, and once that 2 weeks pass, it will be too late to sue. The moment that limitation period expires, they will stop taking your calls. You'll get a final email saying sorry, you're out of time, and that will be that. Don't leave this till the last minute. Let me sue right now, and you'll have the money in no time. Frank was like sure, fine, whatever, don't bother me, I got this blah blah blah, and he got off the phone as soon as he could. I sent him the usual email with clear warnings and recommendations, which he ignored. I sent the email again, and then again as the limitation period approached, and again a couple of days before the deadline. I'm going to be at trial, and you won't be able to reach me, my final email said, but you have to sue. You have other firms on your list, so pick one and sue. He didn't bother to reply, and I went off to do my trial. The trial lasted a couple of weeks, and no email from Frank. Then a month passed, and another month, still no email. I figured he must have sorted things out. Maybe Frank was right after all, I said to myself, and then my phone rang. It was Frank. Remember that fire insurance thing we spoke about? We'd only spoken about it like a dozen times. I figured he was calling up to gloat, so I cut to the chase. So they paid out. That's great, Frank. You were right. He asked me what I was talking about, and could he see a copy of the claim? What claim? I said. The claim against the insurer. You know, that claim. Does that mean the insurer didn't pay? I said. He hung up on me, and then a few minutes later, my computer dinged, and there was Frank's email, talking about how we spoke, and he told me to sue, and he was worried when I hadn't sent him a copy of the claim, so he was following up to get a copy of the claim. I emailed him back. I take it that the insurer didn't pay you, just like I told you they wouldn't, and now that the limitation period is expired, they told you to jump in the lake, leaving you with a loss in the millions. Is that it? I'd made a mistake by not going over Frank's head when he wouldn't listen to me, but if I'd gone over Frank's head, I never would have received another file from him, so I didn't. But that was then, and this was now, so I CC'd Frank's boss and his boss's boss, plus I CC'd Bill, the client's in-house counsel. Bill acknowledged my email right away and called me later that day. Frank messed up, he said, we know that. He's an idiot. So what do we do? So his excuses didn't work. Nope. Bill explained that they'd summoned Frank to a boardroom, but his story didn't add up, given all the warnings I'd sent him. Besides, there would have been no reason for him to keep emailing the insurer if he'd told me to sue. Once the file goes to legal counsel, Frank's role was over. The company knew Frank was bullshitting them. So that's it, then. Bill said, we just lost a couple of $1,000,000. It's okay, I said, explaining that when I realized that Frank was going to fuck up, I issued a claim against the insurer. Because I'd made Frank send me the proof of loss a while earlier, I had enough information that I could sue to preserve the cause of action. Not a great claim and short on details, but good enough. You sued without instructions. Bill said. Lawyers aren't supposed to sue without instructions because if you do that, you're personally liable for whatever costs the other side incurs. It's a big deal to sue without instructions. Yup, I said, I sued without instructions. I pulled up a copy of the claim and emailed it to him as we spoke. It's a little rough, I said, but we can always amend. Thank God. Bill said, can I leave it with you? Of course he could. The insurer was a sitting duck, and I knew I'd collect from them, no problem. A few days later, I got a call from another guy who worked for the client, a guy I didn't normally deal with. They had a situation and needed my help. I usually deal with Frank, I said, what's up? What was up was that Frank got called into another meeting, and they handed him a one-page letter, and then he put his little office things in a box, and security walked him past his coworkers to the elevator and escorted him downstairs to the parking lot. Bye-bye, Frank. He was too old to get another job, or at least, not a decent one. It was a life-changing event for Frank, but for me, he was just an anecdote, a cautionary tale that I tell young lawyers sometimes over beers, maybe too often, because I'm getting on in years and I have my favorite stories. I wasn't trying to get revenge on Frank, not at all, and I would have felt a bit sorry for him if he hadn't been trying to throw me under the bus. But the guy who replaced him was great and never nickel and dimed me, so it was all good. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.